Welcome to the Parenting Great Kids podcast. Today we have a fabulous show and a phenomenal guest who is here to provide us with profound insights into the world of parenting and raising healthy achievers. Jennifer Wallace, an award-winning journalist and social commentator, is renowned for her coverage of parenting and lifestyle trends in publications such as the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post. Her expertise extends to television, where she passionately discusses her articles and engages in conversations about hot topics in the news. Today, we're going to be talking about her brand new book, Never Enough: When Achievement Culture Becomes Toxic and What We Can Do About it. Our episode today is a treasure trove of wisdom as Jennifer shares her findings from a national survey of parents, from unraveling the intricacies of achievement culture to delving into the crucial concept of mattering in our children's lives. Jennifer is equipped with a wealth of knowledge that promises to resonate with every parent, and that includes you. Jennifer, thanks so much for coming on my podcast today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm a big fan of yours,
And
Dr.
right
Meg.
back at you. Your national survey has uncovered some fascinating insights into the challenges that both parents and kids have. Can you elaborate on the key findings and shed some light on them so we parents can understand the stresses in our kids' lives?
So thank you for asking that. When I first started researching this book as a parent, I have 3 teenagers myself, and I was noticing how different their childhood was from my own. You know, I grew up with family dinners. I believe that I have similar values to my own parents, and yet our family dinners were often hijacked with homework and after school sports. I enjoyed downtime as a family, but our weekends were fractured with my husband driving one son one place, me going to a chess tournament, et cetera, et cetera. So I wanted to know, is this achievement pressure that I was feeling in New York City, where I'm based, is it being felt everywhere? And so with the help of a researcher at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, I conducted a first of its kind parenting survey. The researcher I was working with said, we need to get a sample size of 1,000 to really be able to see trends. And I said, okay, I think we can do it. Within a few days, over 6,500 parents had filled it out. This was not just a feeling on the coasts. It was being felt in Alaska, in Texas, in Cleveland, Ohio, Jackson, Wyoming. I asked parents how much they agreed or disagreed on a scale from 1 to 4, with statements like, others think that my children's academic success is a reflection of my parenting. 83% of parents somewhat or strongly agreed. Now, I don't think when I was growing up in the 70s and early 80s that my parents felt like my achievement was their responsibility. Okay, here's another question I asked. The burdens, again, from 1 to 4, how much they agreed with this. The burdens and expectations of parenting often leave me anxious, stressed, or unhappy. 62% of parents somewhat or strongly agreed. I asked them, again, on a scale from 1 to 4, how much they agreed with this. I feel responsible for my children's achievement and success. 75% of parents agreed or somewhat agreed. And here's the last thing I'll read you. I wish today's childhood was less stressful for my kids. 87% of parents somewhat or strongly agreed. So again, I wanted to make sure this wasn't just a coastal thing or a few affluent communities, and it isn't. I, for 4 years, traveled the country, meeting with families, and I interviewed historians and sociologists and psychologists and anthropologists to really get to what was the root of this anxiety that we parents were feeling. And the story that resonates most with me is what I call the economic story. So again, when I was growing up in the 70s and early 80s, life was generally more affordable. Housing, healthcare, higher education, all of these things were so much more affordable than they are today. Parents back then could be relatively assured that even with some setbacks, even with a C plus in math, like I got, that most likely I'd be able to pivot and do at least as well as my parents, if not even better. That's always been the American dream, to not only do as well as your parents, but to do better. But today's parents are facing a different economic reality. We are seeing the first generation, the millennials, who are not doing as well as their parents on average. We are feeling the crush of the middle class. We are feeling the steep inequity that's been ushered in over the last few decades. And we are seeing the uncertainty of our future. And so it's always been the job of a parent to prepare a kid for the future, but it has never felt so fraught and uncertain. And so what the researchers who I interviewed told me is parents like me, parents like the ones I talk about in this book and those I surveyed, we're absorbing these pressures, these macroeconomic pressures, and it's coming out in our
Mhm.
parenting. We want to raise kids who can thrive and do well in a hyper competitive future. And unfortunately, what we are asking of them is not always developmentally appropriate.
Would you
There's a
say
better way.
it's more frequently not developmentally appropriate? It seems to me, and I wanna hear your opinion, that a lot of kids who are feeling this pressure and the parents who are feeling this pressure really aren't equipped to be able to live that out.
I think I I think parents feel under pressure to raise kids who can thrive in an uncertain future. And what does that look like as a parent? For many parents, like you said, it's getting them into a good college, it's helping them get a good job. Again, these parents, I have yet to meet, and I'm sure you feel the same way probably in your practice. I've yet to meet a parent that did not have their children's best interest at heart. Not one. But unfortunately, as you're talking about it, too many parents, I think, are more rigid than they should be about the goals that they have set for their own children. And again, this is not to blame parents. The pressures that parents are feeling are bigger than any one family, any one school, and any one community. But yes, what I saw in my research, actually, I went in search of the kids who were doing well despite the pressures. I wanted to know what their parents had in common, what they focused on at home, what were the mindsets, what were the behaviors, what were the expectations. And I outline it in depth in the book. But what it boiled down to was that these parents of healthy strivers made sure their kids knew that they were valued despite their successes, despite their achievements. They were valued for who they were deep at their core. These young people had a deep sense of what psychologists call mattering, feeling valued, and then being depended on to add value back to the family through chores, to school through volunteer efforts, and the wider community. The kids who were struggling the most had sort of fell into two camps. They felt either that their value was dependent on their achievements, as in their parents only loved them or valued them when. That was one camp. And the other camp of kids felt like they mattered to their parents. Their parents were clear about those messages, but they were never asked to give back in any meaningful way to anyone other than themselves. And so what they lacked is what I call in the book social proof that they mattered. They heard it in words, but they never saw how their strengths, how their life could add something positive to anyone other than themselves in their own
And
resume.
I think we should reiterate, I love what you said earlier, that this is not a parent blame session. These are really good parents doing the best they can. And many of them on the one side believe that telling their kids, you can be the best in soccer, you can have straight A's, you can this and you can that, might say, "Oh yeah, of course I love my kid unconditionally," but their life doesn't display that. And then the other side where they're not telling their kids to have chores and give back or something. A lot of parents do that from a well-intentioned place. So let me ask you this. When a parent loves their child and they want their child to do the best they can, and they constantly, tell them they can do well, how do they then communicate? How do they find that balance between telling their kids they can do well and encouraging them to do well at school, sports, extracurricular activities, whatever. But then also say, but these don't matter. I mean, they matter, but they don't matter. So how do parents do that?
Right. It's really hard. And I spent 4 years looking for kind of the secret
Mhm,
recipe for healthy achievement. So I think it's a few things that parents can do. So many of the young people that I talked to found that praise, like you can be the best on the soccer team, you could get straight A's, that kind of extrinsic praise often felt like pressure
mhm,
for the kid, that they didn't feel like they were enough for who they were inside. I'd love to read you. Aside from the parenting survey, I also did a survey of young adults. Most of them were ages 18 to 22. I wanted to understand we all love our kids unconditionally. Like I said earlier, I have yet to meet a parent
mhm,
that doesn't. The problem is our kids don't hear our love for them as unconditional. They hear it as based on conditions. And that is sort of the disconnect between what we feel and what they
exactly.
hear. And so if I could, I'd love to read you a few things. I asked the students about how much they believed their parents loved and appreciated them. And more than 70% of the young adults I surveyed reported that they thought their parents valued and appreciated them more when they were successful in work and in school. More than 50% went so far as to say they thought their parents loved them more when they were successful, with 25% of students saying they believed this a
Mhm,
lot. That's the maximum my survey allowed. So when I asked the students, what is one thing you wish the adults in your life knew about the pressure you felt in school? I will tell you their responses were a little hard to hear as a parent myself. I'll read you a couple of them. One of them wrote, this was in an open-ended survey. One student wrote, I wish my parents would have understood that grades are not everything. Their pressure to be an overachiever was the catalyst for my depression and anxiety issues. Another student wrote, it felt like my worth was tied to my grades. And then read you one last one. I wish my parents knew that it's okay for me to get less than perfect grades sometimes. It's okay not to be exceptional in everything. So again, this is not to blame parents. I am so tired of the narrative that blames parents. Parents today are parenting under an extraordinary circumstance. We don't know what something like half of the jobs are going to be when our kids are on the scene because of technology. AI is now upending things. We are trying to prepare our kids for a future that none of us
mhm,
know what it looks like. And so what are parents doing? They are hoping, they are looking at college, a brand name college, as a kind of life vest to keep their kids afloat in a sea of uncertainty, right? If I can't control for the future, but if I just strap on the University of Michigan on my
mhm,
kids' life vest, that'll keep them afloat no matter what. But unfortunately, what I am seeing and what the research is showing is that that life vest is becoming a leaded vest
mm,
for too many of the kids we are trying to protect. I'd love to tell you quickly about two national policy reports that found these students, these high achieving students, are now officially an at risk group. After kids in poverty, children with incarcerated parents, children of recent immigrants, children living in foster care, it's now these students. They are 2 to 6 times more likely to suffer from clinical levels of anxiety and depression, and 2 to 3 times more likely to suffer from substance abuse disorder than the average American teen. And this is according to the National Academies of Sciences and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, two very credible reports. So this book is really just sounding an alarm and saying to parents, our kids know that we want them to be
mhm,
successful. We put them in these neighborhoods. We send them to these high achieving schools. They know it. What they need from us is home to be a haven from the pressure, a place to recover, a place where they know their value is never in question. Again, it doesn't mean abandoning standards. For our kids to know that they matter, they have to know we're invested in their future, right? But there is what I call in the book clean fuel and dirty fuel. Clean fuel is the motivation, knowing our kids intimately, getting a PhD in their strengths and their weaknesses, and scaffolding to help them achieve in healthy ways. Dirty fuel is, what a tired parent might employ when they're just at the end of their rope. They just want their kid to study for the Spanish test
Yeah.
on Friday. And that will get you, criticism, comparing them to their older sibling. Those things might get your kid to buckle down out of fear of losing your love. But unfortunately, that dirty fuel over time will clog your child's engine, and they will either burn out, they will stop trying, they will stop reaching because failure is an indictment of their worth. So what I'm here to tell you is there is a way to uncouple our kids' sense of self from their achievements. And it's so critical that we do that if we want to raise healthy strivers.
So, do we reconcile that in our hearts and then communicate that to our kids? Because I've met some parents who'll say, yep, 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 I need to say that. But in their heart, they don't really believe it. They still want their kids to achieve and feel more affection towards their kids and happier with their kids when they achieve. And yet they want to say, oh, yeah, it really doesn't matter to me. I love my child unconditionally. And I feel like saying, that's a much harder task than you think it is, and sort of call them to task. So do you feel that this is a heart issue in a parent?
I think it is a hard issue. I think it's even rummaging through our psychological
Mhm.
attics and understanding the messages we got as a child about achievement and who we were and our worth and our value, and understanding the messages that we have internalized all these years, the messages in our culture about needing to be a perfect mother or a perfect father. Parents today are under stress to be
Mhm.
perfect. We're constantly in judgment, which is part of why I wrote this book, because I was so tired as a parent of being yelled at by quote unquote parenting
Yeah.
experts. So, I would say to parents, I think the first step is coming to terms with what you have internalized. And that could mean going to therapy. It could mean talking to a best friend. It could mean talking to your partner and figuring out what your trigger points are, what your pain points are around achievement and performance and productivity and your value. Do you believe you're worthy of rest? Do you believe that even in the face of failure, that you are valued and you are valuable? Or do you beat yourself up? So these are things that I think as a parent, we need to come to terms with ourselves. And then I think for our kids, it's to make that thinking visible. And I want to give parents a little tip that I got from a really wise mother that I interviewed. So she has two very high performing kids who are very hard on themselves. And she was very hard on herself. She was very much a perfectionist, she told me. And they were modeling after her. And so she did this exercise for herself as much for her kids. So when they would come home disappointed with a grade after studying or getting cut from the A team or a friend rejecting them, she would reach into her wallet and grab whatever bill she had in there, $5, $10, $20. She'd ask her child if they want the money, and they'd say yes. And she'd say, hang on a second. She would wrinkle it up, put it on the floor, dirty it, dunk it in a glass of water, and then hold up this wrinkled, soggy, dirty bill. And she would say, do you still want the money? And they would say, yes. And she would say, like this bill, your value doesn't change, whether you've been knocked down, feel like soggy and wet inside, your value is your value no
Yeah.
matter what. So it's making the thinking visible about unconditional worth.
I love it. That's fabulous. I'm gonna tell my kids to try that on their kids. I often talk to parents about the preload they have coming into parenting, which has a profound effect, on their parenting. For instance, if they had a parent that drove them and the tiger mom. I was very nervous about that book, when it came back a long time ago, because I thought there are going to be a whole lot of parents who are going to run with this whole idea. Um, but what what I have noticed with a lot of parents is that when I want to ask you if this is right or not, a lot of high performing parents, particularly mom and dad, will come in and say, I don't know why my daughter won't settle down. She's so anxious about getting here. She's so anxious about getting there. And I know that underneath their own drivenness might be spilling onto their daughter. So do we make them see their own drivenness or before they help their kids, or do we just jump to the kid?
So I think that's a really good question. So I have studied perfectionism, which I think is what you're hitting
Yes.
on here in this. And perfectionism, there are two pathways. Well, there are more than two pathways, but there are two main pathways in perfectionism in kids. It is the modeling by the parent, most often the mother. Most often the mother is blamed for this
Mhm.
modeling of perfectionism. And so the child sees the modeling and
Mhm.
internalizes it. The other pathway to perfectionism is the idea that I'm only lovable if I perform. And if I don't perform, that I'm going to lose my parents' love and I will be vulnerable. And that is just about the most difficult thing a child could go through. And so they become perfect. They try to become perfect to be worthy of their parents' love. So I would say in both of those scenarios, it is often the parent who was raised him or herself by a perfectionist. So it's this family heirloom that we don't really want because perfectionism, some people claim that there are positives to perfectionism. I have yet to see any of them in the literature. I think it's pretty maladaptive, and what I would say is to tell to explain to parents the pathway to perfectionism, and that we as parents have to model and maybe even come to terms with our own perfectionism. This certainly happened in my house. I will tell you, I have definitely had perfectionistic tendencies, and I was noticing it in my daughter. And then I wrote an article for the Wall Street Journal about it, and I found out that the pathway is generally through the
Ah.
mother. And so I worked very hard on myself to what I say is like live my life out loud for my children. So for my daughter, when I make a mistake, I started saying, oh man, I knew better than this. Why would I have done that? Maybe I was tired, trying to understand it. And then I would say, you know what? I think I've beaten myself up enough. I think it's time to forgive myself and be kind to myself the way
Mhm.
I would a friend. And teaching our children self-compassion, because that is the antidote to
Mhm.
perfectionism, is self-compassion. So modeling that and also modeling our failures. So that same daughter considers herself a writer, and she's a very good writer. And in 7th grade, she got a paperback from her teacher with tons of red
Mhm.
marks on it. She was devastated. And I said, okay, come to my computer. And I pulled up the first article I had written for the Washington Post science section. And it was by one of their most seasoned
Mhm.
editors. And there were red marks everywhere. It was a
Yep.
bloodbath. And my daughter was like, I can't believe they let you
Yeah,
write for them.
yeah.
And I said, well, at first I was a little embarrassed to need so much help. And then I thought, this editor really believes in me. She wants to make me better. She's investing in me. And then I was grateful. And so the way I take feedback to my daughter, Caroline, is that people are investing in me. They see my talent and they want to improve it. And so those are things that I think just small moments that we can give our children about how we handle failure, how we handle
Mhm.
setbacks, and really model it out loud, not just through our modeling, but also talking about it, explaining
Mm.
our thinking and our mindset. But yes, we need to come to terms with it ourselves first.
And I think that we mothers, that's sobering that a lot of this comes through mothers, but I understand it because most kids spend a little more time with their mother than their fathers. Um, but but I believe that a lot of things we mothers say out loud to ourselves have a profound influence on our kids. For instance, I constantly hear mothers say, particularly young ones who've had babies, "Oh, if I could only lose that last 10 pounds." Oh, constantly about a diet. "I've tried this one, and I've tried that one," or, "Gee whiz, I just don't exercise enough. This is awful," or, you know, I don't know that I'm doing a good job feeding the baby, or maybe I bought the wrong car seat. You name it. There's a lot of verbal self-deprecation that mothers use in front of their kids. And I really believe that that shapes the way the kids think. One of my pet peeves, for instance, was how women are always talking about their weight, because it shouldn't be that important. I don't care how much they weigh. So I made a challenge for myself. For 1 month, I would never comment on another woman's weight. But after a month, I didn't even truly notice the figure of a woman, to the point that if they had lost weight and I didn't comment on it, they were insulted. But I think that we can train our kids' thinking according to how we teach them to talk to themselves. Have you seen any evidence of that?
Oh, that is absolutely right. Well, what you're telling me is you are saying that we are spending our airtime with our kids talking about values that maybe really shouldn't
Mhm,
be a value. So, you have written beautifully about values. Values impact well-being. And so, what we choose to shine a light on, where we choose to spend our energy thinking about, our motivation, is it to lose weight so I look thin, so people will accept me and think I'm beautiful? That's a shallow sense of self. Is it I want to be in good shape because I want to be able to roll on the floor with my grandkids one day? That's a different
mhm,
motivation. That's a healthier motivation. But yeah, I think where we spend our time and our breath and our energy and our attention shapes our lives and shapes our kids' lives. And that you're bringing me to one of the most profound things I think I learned in the book. I have a whole chapter on this about how values impact
mm,
well-being. And researchers who study values say that we all have roughly a dozen core values inside all of us, no matter where we live in the world. But depending on the pond we swim in, depending on our environment, certain values are
mhm,
activated. And so if you're, living in a community where how you look, what your house looks like, what your car looks like, those things are highly valued. Those are what researchers call
mhm.
materialistic goals. Those materialistic goals are linked with negative mental health and well-being and substance abuse disorder. Intrinsic goals, those are the other half of goals. Those are things like spirituality, want to be a good neighbor, wanting to be good to the environment, want to be a kind person. Those are intrinsic values. Those are things that lead to the well being that we want for our kids. So when you're talking about what we're talking about out loud, the researchers I interviewed say we as parents, we are all raising our kids in a materialistic culture. That is the way the world is today. So our energy needs to be hammering home the intrinsic values because values operate like a zero sum game. The more time you give, the more lip service you give to materialistic goals, the less time you have in your life for
Mhm,
intrinsic ones. So this is a long way of saying replace those materialistic things that you say. When a cousin gets accepted into Yale, don't make such a big deal about it. It's really, I got to be honest, I went to Harvard. It truly is not that big a deal.
yeah,
There are so many people I know in
mhm,
my life who went to Ivies whose lives did not turn out the way they'd hoped, and many more people who had gone to schools that I'd never even heard of, whose lives turned out so much better than they ever would have
mhm,
imagined. So that's just one thing. Same thing with weight. These are all materialistic things that we are instead of talking about those things, talk about, the woman down the street who is the best neighbor, who just always knows how to pitch in, how to help, gives that invisible support. Just valuing people for who they are at their core. That's when our kids can start to see that we value them and that they should be valuing others for who they are at their core. And boy, what a better
Oh
society we would
my.
be.
How important are parents' friends in this? I tend to gravitate towards other women who share my values and who, swim in my pond, if you will. And a lot of those tend to be women who aren't as focused on, material things. Now, I live in northern Michigan. I'm not in a city, we live on a farm. And so it's easier for me and my friends not to focus on the materialistic. But how important is it for women to have friends who want to communicate the same thing to their kids and have the same values?
It is so important. The parents of the healthy strivers I met, they were in very affluent communities. Many of them were. And so what they did was they prioritized going for long walks with friends as opposed to going shopping or having
Yeah.
drinks. They prioritized different things. And I will tell you another really big finding in my research. And this I didn't know. You probably know this as a pediatrician. But the number one intervention for any child in distress is to make sure the primary caregivers, most often the mother, that our support system, our friendships are intact, our well-being, our mental health, because a child's resilience rests fundamentally on the resilience of the adults in their lives. And adult resilience rests fundamentally on our relationships, our friendships. So invest in those friendships, invest in those people that activate the values that you hold
Mhm.
dear. Surround yourself with those people when you feel yourself going off course, because we're all going to in this materialistic world. We are all going to be pulled off course. It is those friendships that bring you back to your values, remind you of who you are. So it is critically important. And you don't need a ton
Mhm.
of friends. The research finds just one or two or three people who know you and value you for who you are at your core, who you can open up to, who give you that kind of unconditional love and support that you want to give your own child. That's what you need to be resilient as a parent. You talked about
Mhm.
preloading, which I've never heard that term before. I
Mhm.
love it. I think preloading is how you referred to it as your upbringing. I also think preloading is how you spend
Mhm.
your days. If you're in an office setting where you are made to feel like you don't matter, that you are just a cog in the wheel, 8, 10 hours a day, how can you hope to show up for your kids and be fully resilient and be the first responder to their struggles? It is very hard. That is why we need our friendships. When we are feeling
Mhm.
beaten down at work, when things aren't going well, to be able to turn to a friend and have that friend fill you up so that you can be that full person that you want to be for your kids every day. I also think that I'm actually writing a
Oh.
second book about adult
Mm.
mattering. So this book, the solution was mattering, this firm sense of mattering. What I found in my travels was that so many adults did not
Yeah.
feel like they mattered, or that their mattering was
Mm.
contingent, and they were reporting unbelievable. They were so open with me about their loneliness in their own marriages, loneliness in their neighborhoods, loneliness with their friendships, either because they didn't have the time to invest because they were working full time and just struggling to survive with their kids. There were lots of reasons for the loneliness. And so mattering, this next book is about mattering in adulthood, because I think that is at the root of so much of our anxiety, depression, and
I love the way
loneliness.
you put that, because one of the things that I hammer home to younger mothers in particular, who feel so much stress, to breastfeed. The stress begins the moment they find out they're pregnant because they need to take this vitamin, they need to do this, they need to eat this way, and I can just see the angst. Then the baby's born and they have to get the right equipment. They have to breastfeed a certain way, a certain length. They can't put their baby in daycare. They got to do and I see mothers so anxious and I stop them and I say something that a lot of pediatricians would hate, and that is, "Look, if you are feeling depressed, but you won't get adequate help or take your medication, whatever, because you're breastfeeding, stop breastfeeding. What your child needs is for you to be healthy and grounded because even babies, even in utero, they pick up anxiety and depression in mothers. And a mother's emotional health is so critical in the health of their children, not just their babies, But as they get older, and there's this sense that mothers need to surrender every part of who they are in order to accommodate the best of what they're told by friends and social media, um, that needs to happen or they need to do for their kids. And so it's can get kind of complicated.
It can, but I think what you and I are saying is it
Right.
doesn't have to be. To 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 raise healthy, resilient kids, they require healthy, resilient parents. And so the number one priority is the mother and the father. Their mental health needs to be in check. Their support system needs to be there. There is no more important variable. Parents today are so wrapped up in
Mhm.
scripts. Oh, what do I say in this scenario? None of that matters. What matters is your health as the
Mhm.
parent. That is what matters, your mental health, so that you can be there, so that you could be the responsive caregiver that your child needs. That is it. Number one.
I could talk to you for another hour on this book because the book is so good. Honestly, it was one of my favorites of the whole year. My guest has been Jennifer Wallace, and she wrote the book Never Enough: When Achievement Culture Becomes Toxic and What to Do About It. New York Times bestseller. You have to read the book because every parent will resonate with what you're saying. And I think that the book, at least for me, was one of those books that you go, "Oh, good, good, thank you." Because we
Thank
all
you.
want things simpler. We want our lives to be more fun. We wanna have better relationships with our kids, and it's less complicated than we think it is, but it's hard to do because we're going to, parent against the culture and against our friends. Jennifer, thank you so much for coming, on my program. I can't wait to read your next book. Do you know when it's gonna come out?
I'm in the midst of reporting on it now, so it's not due for another year,
Okay. Yeah, and
thankfully.
honestly and truly, friends, that's how long it takes to write a good book is a year. It's not done in 3 months or something. So, anyway, this has just been truly delightful, and I look forward to interviewing again when it comes out.